5 disturbing truck stories from backroads. Story 1. The Hanging Man. I was driving home one night as I had not seen my family for about 2 weeks. Filled with excitement, I decided to take a shortcut through a desolated area that I didn't know too well. I'd heard stories through the scanner about it, mostly ghosty tales, and I do, as a matter of fact, believe in ghosts, but my eagerness to surprise my wife and kids got the best of me. It was about 3:40 a.m. or so in the morning, and I had been on that particular road for about an hour already, and nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Suddenly, I get to an area parked with old creepy trees on the side and tons of shrubbery. As usual, my radio was on, and out of nowhere, this horrible static starts to crackle through the speakers. I started to feel chilly and uncomfortable when, wouldn't you know it, I saw a man hanging from a tree on the side of the road. There he was. His body was even swinging from side to side. I stepped on the brake as fast and carefully as I could, but I kept looking through the rearview mirror and he was still there. I grabbed my coat, my gun, and my flashlight, and I had my phone in my pocket, and I started to dial 911, but there was no signal. I made my way through the shrubs, and when I reached the tree, he was gone. I moved the flashlight around, thinking maybe he got free. I went back to my truck, looked back, and there he was again, hanging like I'd seen him before. After this, let's just say I didn't like taking shortcuts anymore. Story 2. Jeepers Creepers. My friend and I stopped at some shady truck stop off Interstate 37 going towards Corpus Christi, Texas. He fell asleep as usual, and I'm not gonna lie, I was about to pass out too. I finally decided to pull over, and I fell asleep when a little while later we heard a loud bang on the side of the cab that startled us. We woke up immediately to find this big lizard-like creature with red glowing eyes and sharp-looking teeth looking back at us. No, it wasn't the creature from the movie Jeepers Creepers either, and you don't have to believe me, but we both know what we saw that night. It stood there I don't know how many minutes just looking at us, nothing else. After that, it flew over the cab and took off in the dark of the night. Story 3. Object in the Sky. I'm not one to believe in anything like this, but this I had to share. During the summer of 05-06, around 2 a.m., driving back from Rushville, Illinois, about northeast of the town, there's a rural area filled with cornfields and woods. My father was driving and I was in the passenger seat when my dad suddenly taps my shoulder and points out the window and tells me, "Look." About 300 yards out or so, there's a large object flying a few hundred feet away from the ground, smoothly and constantly passing us. It looked like it had either 1 or 2 levels, rows of lights that went along the sides, and bright, large rectangle windows with rounded corners spewing out red light. It made no sound and it flew straight, did not rotate, and it had no blinking or no flashes of any kind, indicating that it could be some sort of small plane or, nay, traditional aircraft. It kept flying straight forward and disappeared into the distance. I turned to my dad, and we both looked at each other and said, "That was interesting," and kept driving home with no further comment. Story 4. Shapeshifter. Many years ago, I was on a shift called Meet and Churn. This is where the driver that is domiciled out of the city will drive a load halfway to its destination, while the other driver that meets him halfway and brings the load where it needs to be delivered. I had been doing runs like these for several of months, and I found out that I had to meet on point an hour before the other driver arrived. It was a dark and empty lot around 3 a.m., so since there was still some time to kill, I decided to close my eyes and take a short nap. About 10 minutes into my nap, I was awakened by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but the bark carried on for several of minutes, and it grew louder and closer. At this point, it became clear that he's either trying to alert me of something, or he's just being a pain in the butt. So I sat up and looked out my window, and what I saw left me motionless. Standing there, inches on the other side of the glass, was a man around 35 years of age. He was a large fellow, and he was barking at me. His eyes were crazy, and he was even frothing a little from his mouth. The sheer creepiness struck me, and gently, without making any sudden movements, I reached down and started my truck and slowly started pulling away. As I was doing so, he was chasing after me, much like you would expect an angry dog, and still barking as I kept pulling away. Needless to say, I don't take naps on the job anymore. Story 5. The Crying Child. I used to drive between San Francisco and Cheyenne, Wyoming a lot of times. It's about 16 to 20 hours of driving depending on the weather. My second time driving that route, I was driving at night when suddenly my truck starts to make this odd grinding noise. Sounded like if I had run over something and it got stuck. It's about 2 a.m. and I pull up to a very well-lit rest stop and I wake my buddy up, who had been sleeping the whole time. As we both make our way out of the vehicle, I start to explain to him the situation about the grinding noise, when we start to hear what it sounded like a kid crying. There's not a car in sight besides ours. At the same time, we had heard frequent stories about child trafficking and kidnappings nearby, so we decided to check it out. We grabbed our flashlights and made our way towards the bathroom since the noise was coming from there. As we got closer, we realized it was coming from the women's bathroom. It's a low, dull sobbing, and we were prepared for the worst. We walked in expecting to see somebody brutally beaten, or worse, and we see nothing but only hear the sound. It is still there, but there's no one there. It's completely empty. We turned the lights on and still nothing. We checked each stall just to make sure, and nothing. We even looked exactly where the noise was coming from. And again, nothing. Is it a hidden camera? A speaker? What the fuck? My buddy sees a small window and opens it up, and the noise decreased. We stood there for a few seconds, and the window slams shut on its own, and the crying begins again. We were out of that bathroom in seconds as we ran towards the truck, and you can still hear the crying. Of course, the grinding noise is still there, so this time I pull up to another rest stop miles away where we checked underneath, and we saw some sort of red and silver metal stuck right in there, and we couldn't take it out. A few days later, I took it to a mechanic buddy of mine, and he told me that the piece of scrap metal that was stuck was part of a kid's bicycle. I don't know if this is somehow related to our experience, but it was one of those moments for me that I will never